welcome. I'm not quite sure I'm going to stand, so I'm going to stand for those of you who are here in person. So first of all, thank you everyone for being here in person and present as we're here for this amazing presentation. It's really wonderful. Give yourselves a hand. We'd like to thank the Mellon Foundation and also Stephanie Young, who is the coordinator and faculty lead supporting the community collaborators, and everyone from the museum who has been amazing, Krista and Stephanie, doing this great work supporting our community collaborators as well. Also to the other community collaborators for your work and for your collegiality and communal spirit in support of one another. And thanks to Mills, and thanks to everyone. Thanks to Joshua for doing the work on the Zoom. Thanks for hosting us. So, Tiffany Cruz, I asked her to write a few words because I could talk about Tiffany for an hour and then it would be time to leave, which would not be helpful. So, Tiffany Cruz is a Mellon community collaborator and an MA, take this off, in English literature. Candidate who will finish next year. She is going to present this evening her letterpress illuminated book project. She focuses on 19th century British literature through the voices of Black, Indigenous, people of color. Tiffany believes in amplifying the voices of those in the past and bringing them to life in the present. She recently gave a presentation related to this work at the Jury National Popular Culture Association Conference entitled The Darkness Behind the Turban, the Moor and Islamophobia in Charlotte Dockray's 19th century novel, Zofloya. She also runs a bookstagram with over 800 followers where she writes book reviews and shares recommendations. Tiffany also loves trying new vegan recipes, visiting art museums, and writing. I want to add a couple of things, one of which is that she writes really, really good fiction too, and I don't know if you guys have read this, but it's phenomenally good. I anticipate that Tiffany will be a scholar and a writer in a variety of genres that I will be able to say, I worked with her when she was first beginning. I expect to be assigning her books. I expect to be inviting her to give lectures in larger formats. The work that she's doing is really, really tremendously important at this crux in the moment that we navigate how to address historical literatures and spaces that were violently unethical, unfair, and oppositional to the lived experience of almost everyone, but particularly Black, Indigenous, people of color, women, and how to also then engage with the complexities of the pleasure that one can take both in the past agency and present agency as we negotiate those works. So I could not be more proud than to introduce you to Tiffany Cruz. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I'm so excited to be here with you guys today. This is my project, Maidens in the Moorlands, Black Women in 19th Century British Literature. And you go ahead. Okay, so I first want to start off by kind of how it began. Why do I study 19th century British literature? We kind of touched upon that a little bit, but growing up, I've always been really interested in literature and history. I got my bachelor's degree in anthropology, and I focused my work and research around people of color. So during the pandemic, I started to read again for fun, and I really fell in love with the work of Jane Austen and the Regency period in England. However, I really wanted to center my work around people of color, and so I looked to the ways that I can combine my love of 19th century literature with a specific focus. And I really do love like the overall aesthetic of the 19th century in England, and I really wanted to look at the ways in which people of color moved through European society in history and in literature at that time. So I want to talk a little bit about kind of the work that I've done so far. So my focus on 19th century has really been a thorough line through my graduate work, and I recently gave a presentation at the Jury National Popular Culture Association Conference on Islamophobia and Moorish depictions in the Gothic novel Zofloya. I've also crafted a research paper that explores the life of Miss Lamb from the unfinished book Sanditon by Jane Austen, and this really explores the implications of being a wealthy Black heiress. And I recently applied to the National Austen Conference to present this work. And I've also created a final presentation in my Theories and Strategies course that is entitled Beyond the White Western Lens, How to Diversify Classroom Literature. And I was showing how to incorporate authors of color into Western literature courses, specifically highlighting like ancient authors like Apuleius and Andalusian Moorish poets. And so this is just some of the research that I've done in my first year here at Mills. So now I want to talk a little bit about the creation of the book and kind of what inspired that, and answering the question why I chose to create a book. So in deciding to create the book that I'm going to be sharing with you today, I had a number of things that I really wanted to focus on. So the first thing was that the medium of a book really captures the time period, since this was a way that information was shared, and the material status of the book really shapes its contents and circulation. And I'm also really interested in historical manuscripts, specifically their way of capturing images and text simultaneously. And however, we really don't see Black women depicted in these pieces. And so the book not only depicts these women, but it also brings them into mediums that they were excluded from. And so the book really puts these texts that center Black women in conversation with the European artwork that is alongside that. And it really shows the way in which we can center upper-class Black women to showcase the ways in which race and gender Eurocentric concepts of selfhood really limit both their lived and literary arcs for these Black women, regardless of their financial status. And it also demonstrates the impossibility of even a fictional happy ending for these Black women in a country whose empire is based on racial capital. And finally, the book is really a celebration of their rich culture and presence in European history and literature by bringing these texts and images to life in a new way. So these are the books that I chose, and I chose these because they have a lot of similarities between them. The two protagonists are upper-class Black women who have one white parent, their father, and they're navigating British society under these conditions. So the first book is The Woman of Color, and that was published in 1808, and The Blood of the Vampire, which was published in 1897. And so I was really interested in them, even though they have this gap in publication time, because they both have really similar themes and sentiments that I wanted to introduce to the readers. And alongside the quotes, I have artwork that really reflects the quote that it's paired with. So for some pieces, I went with the tone and highlighting that. So for example, in more somber scenes, I had artwork that depicted women with more serious facial expressions. And I incorporated different styles of manuscripts and colors to really add some variety into the book. And I also even incorporated some hidden elements into the pages as well to really give an ode to these characters and their backgrounds. So for example, on one of the pages, I have plants that are native to the West Indies in the background. And these are just kind of some artistic elements that I chose to add to this medium and further personalize it for these women and their experiences. And so The Woman of Color is chronicled in letters, and it follows the life of Olivia, whose father has died. And in his will, he states she must either marry her cousin or be financially dependent on his elder brother. And then in The Blood of the Vampire, this is a Gothic text that follows the life of Harriet, who has basically left the convent that she's lived in, and she is traveling around Europe with her immense fortune. However, she's also an energy vampire, and whoever gets too close to her for too long dies. And so now I'm going to be talking about some of the quotes and the pages that are featured in my book. So the first few quotes are going to be from The Woman of Color. So this is one of my pages and the quote, and I'm going to go ahead. And then I'm going to go ahead and just read some of the analysis that I wrote. So Olivia embarks on the journey to England for a questionable marriage. Her desire to help the enslaved peoples pours into a faint memory as her island gets smaller and smaller. The pockets of peace, religious comfort, eases her mind temporarily. Her life dictated through life and death. She cannot stand on her own comfortably with the looming ghostly demands of her late father. She now owes her life to the cousin she will marry. Her father saw her dreams as implausible for someone like her. His ideal plan for her life has taken precedence. The aspirations of Black women diminish for the benefit of a larger scheme. So this quote is from earlier on in the book, and I feel like it really lets us into the mind of Olivia and kind of how she's feeling in this moment when she's given this news. And it also really does bring up this theme of self-sacrifice that I feel like you see within this book and the other book as well. And it's just kind of like a common theme when we talk about people of color and the ways in which they constantly have to sacrifice their own, goals and aspirations in order to please someone else. And in this case, this is her father. And so she goes from really one white adult dictating what her life is going to be like to another when she is going to be married to her cousin. And so it really brings into play this larger question of why can't she just stay home and do what she values with her life? And this is the second page and quote that I'm going to be talking about. So, belittling thoughts, bowls filled with white rice, white tears cooked with envy. Olivia consumes British colonization baked into bread. She consistently keeps her people in her thoughts and dreams. These aggressive racial remarks fuels Olivia's desire to push past all the noise. The sly remarks come off their tongues casually as they are filled with shock when Olivia stands up for herself. She does not let them get away with their cruel tongue. The subtlety of Olivia's lyrical riposte. The tables continue to turn, the crumbs falling on the floor to be swept away like the remnants of Olivia's past. So this is an exchange that happens between Olivia and her aunt, who has made it very clear that she doesn't like her and she doesn't like the fact that she's there. And this is something we see throughout the book, that her family is constantly telling her how she's different, how she doesn't belong there. They're always making remarks about her race. And then they're always also trying to mask it under this guise of politeness and hospitality, because especially in this particular quote, she's asking if she is interested in eating something different, but not asking her in a way of like, oh, I genuinely want to know if you're interested in eating this. I just want to tell you that this is how we do things here, and this is how you did things back home. And so Olivia constantly has to defend herself, and she constantly defends the people that she cares about. And she is always telling them like kind of how they are unkind, and really makes clear her stance on all of this. And so her family isn't really used to that, because they really didn't think that she would, act in this type of way. And so this is the final page from The Woman of Color. So change of British society cover Olivia, pushing her down into the depths of deep sorrow. Crowds of strange faces, eyes burning flesh, their remarks asphyxiate the fresh, clean air. Visions of green grass that sparkle as they sink to the sky. Open meadows hiding vulgar remarks as Olivia's breath breathes in clarity. The need to contrast the pain of the past few weeks with open space and less noise. So Olivia's continuing to deal with a lot of hardships while she is in England, and come to find out that her cousin is actually secretly married and is going to have a kid. And so this puts her in a really bad situation of uncertainty, because she is now trying to figure out what is going to happen next. She can't get married to him, obviously, because he's already married. And this is just really putting a lot of pressure on Olivia. And it seems that she is really tired of having to constantly behave in this perfect way, constantly be, quote, this good character, because the people around her just don't give her that same respect. And we see Olivia continue to, have to self-sacrifice in order to really appease the people around her. And I think for her, that is becoming, especially in this instance, becoming a point where it's becoming too much for her to be able to deal with. And so now I'm going to go ahead and move on to some quotes from The Blood of the Vampire. Okay, so salty sea air engulfs Harriet, rendering her even more beautiful. Fake friends surround her, magnetically pulled, unable to escape. Intoxicated, blinded by the dollar signs that flash in their pupils as she opens her mouth to speak. The envy contagiously spreads, leaving no man or woman behind. British elites selfishly pass their judgments on Harriet. They cannot see her as a true person, just a shell of what they deem as worth feeling jealousy over, the very superficial things that come and go. So the people that really hang around Harriet are really there because she has this immense wealth, this immense fortune, and she can't really tell who is her true friend or not, because people just really want to hang out with her to be able to really use her for what she has. And there's also this constant mention of her beauty and comparing her to animals like snakes and tigers. So she's constantly being fetishized for her appearance by both the men and the women of this text. And so no one really ever looks at Harriet for who she truly is, and just like the way in which she wants to be viewed by other people. This is the next page. So Harriet possesses all that would elevate her status and provide comforts that people battled for. But She still sits in isolation from those who surround her. The loudest voice in the room, shunned by the people who want to consume her wealth, her body, but leave the real her behind. Dr. Phillips announces her affliction through cold words that provide no empathy, no solution, just a seclusion no human can face. She questions his intentions and why he proclaims his conquest in destroying her desire for companionship. The doctor's words ingrain a scar into Harriet's mind. Whiteman's doom becomes Harriet's despondency, marked by a blood stain, the further degradation of Black love, the forbidden fruit of devotion, ending with a fall from grace. So in this particular quote, this is later on in the book, and so Dr. Phillips knows about Harriet and her past, and he knew her father, and so her father was basically a scientist in England, but he had to leave because he was having illegal experiments, and then he basically took those to Jamaica and he started experimenting on the Black enslaved people there. And so that ended up basically causing them to revolt and burn the whole place to the ground, killing Harriet's mother and father. And that is why she was sent to live in the convent. But she didn't know this until now. So this is her kind of finding out about that. And basically he is telling her that she comes from this family of pure evil and that she can't continue to be around these people that she's, trying to make friends with because she's a danger to them. And his grand solution is to really isolate her from everyone and anyone. But that is the really big burden that Harriet doesn't want to have. And, she spent her whole life in this convent and she is at a point now where she's free. She wants to go around and really, explore everything. But she's put in this situation where she is being told that she can't do that. And so this is kind of like a really big turning point in the text, and really kind of just shows just overall the ways in which these people really view her and her quote curse. And this is the last quote from the Blood of the Vampire. So, Harriet's heart pulses with happiness for the first time. Love. She has found love. Her husband sees her, her intellect, her beauty, and just sees her, which Harriet values over everything else. Her life was hidden behind walls that closed her off from herself. Her existence confined, hidden, and deadly. The cruel world that stifled Black women and the way marriage could help bring her out of this. Now, her tragic ending, burned deeper than the flesh cut by a blade, the scenes playing in Harriet's eyes presented the ideal world against the confines of a society that would not let her have it. The white-stained storybook with no room for Black ink, an ending already written from the first page. So Harriet ultimately does get married to this white guy who also happens to be a socialist. And he's not like the best, but he's like the best option basically, and she feels happy. So that's good. But this comes just before the ending. And so unfortunately, given the nature of her life, she ends up draining him of his life basically, and he ends up passing away. And so that kind of really puts things into perspective for her, because obviously, Dr. Phillips was talking to her about these things, but now she really kind of sees what her existence does to other people. And so she ends up committing suicide because she doesn't see her life as valuable anymore. And something that this made me wonder about it makes me kind of wonder if the draining of white people's energy is a larger look into the way that Black people have been drained of their own lives through colonization. And this is kind of working in the inverse. Now, whether or not the text itself was written in that kind of way, it's interesting to just think about that, because the people obviously who are around her are white people, and those are the people who are ending up, being killed from this. And yet again, this is another example that we see of Black women who have wealth, who have privilege, and much more, but ultimately can't escape the confines that are British society. Hey, so I just want to end with some final reflections. So I wanted to just read a part of the acknowledgements that's in the back of my book. So I want to take a moment to thank all of the amazing Black women that I learned about throughout this project. Being able to explore more about their lives, their ideas and challenges truly made this book what it is. These women have been an integral part of Western civilization, and their contributions are overlooked. Fiction stems from real life, and I can only fit a small amount of all of this amazing literature and artwork into my book, but there is still so much more waiting out there for someone to find it. And I really encourage all of you to go out there, discover these new things for yourself, and share them with other people. This is my work site. Thank you, guys. Does anyone have any questions or any comments or anything you'd like to share? Yeah.
How was, outside of this, how was the labor for this and the creation of the book? Because beyond those, we have a book arts class. So like you working not in that class, how was the process for you trying to collect all these pieces together and the artwork that you wanted to use? What was that labor like for you?
Yeah, so I first kind of started thinking about this project last summer, and I kind of slowly started collecting things, and I really used Instagram as a source for a lot of the materials that I collected with the paintings. There are some really great like Instagram accounts that curate basically European artwork with people of color. And so I started kind of collecting that and just kind of collecting everything that I could find to basically have just like this folder of things. So when I went to actually create the book itself, I could kind of go through and figure out what I wanted to use. All of the pages are created in Photoshop. So this is my first time using Photoshop. So I definitely like learned how to do all of that. But yeah, every single page I've created there. And that took quite a bit of time. And the physical book itself, I ended up getting it printed through Grimm's Bindery. They're based out of Wisconsin, and they've basically been printing since the 1800s. And so that's why I decided to choose them, because they were able to create the book in the way of the 19th century. And so that definitely helped with the overall process. But in total, I created and designed 62 pages. Okay, so she was asking, since I said that they had similarities, do you think that the author of The Blood of the Vampire was like inspired by the first book, The Woman of Color? So it's interesting because The Woman of Color actually was kind of like, I want to say like hidden for a while, like it wasn't published. And so basically there's a professor, Lyndon Dominique, and he's done a lot of really great work around this book. And he's the one who basically like discovered it, like rediscovered it. And so I'm not entirely sure if maybe they had like known about the other one, but I definitely think that like they do offer like similar themes, and you see that with kind of other literature at the time as well. And so, but with The Blood of the Vampire, that was written by a white woman, and then The Woman of Color is written by anonymous, but there's a lot of speculation as to who wrote it. And I speculate that it is a woman of color just because of her writing and the way that she kind of tackles these situations. And you can kind of just tell that she has a different perspective when she's writing versus like a white author. Yeah.
I know that you kind of provided this at the beginning, but I was wondering if you could share a little bit more about just the inspiration behind the analysis.
Okay.
Did you feel like these characters needed more context or more like, I guess, like attention? Could you just get to that?
So she's asking about inspiration behind the analysis. And so with the analysis, the reason why I wrote it in the way that I did was because I wanted something that was more narrative style. I didn't want it to read like an essay. So I kind of wanted to mirror the fact that these are literature books. And so I wanted to have that same style when I was kind of writing the explanations. And so with the analysis, I really kind of just wanted to take a deeper look into the quotes that I picked, because I feel like there's so much more to be said. And this was kind of my way of adding in like my commentary on it, and kind of like adding more to the quotes in a way that I think like they didn't necessarily have that in them.
I would love to hear a little bit more about the importance of the material object of the book and the placing of the paintings in conversation. Because you don't make the analysis explicit, I think there's something really evocative, and you have a lot of really careful borders,
yeah,
and a lot of detail. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about what's going on with that physical objects.
Yeah, so with the actual physical design of the book, like I mentioned earlier, I really wanted to kind of use manuscripts that were already created and just kind of rework them. And by having the artwork in particular, I wanted to kind of showcase that there are these pieces of art that are out there that maybe people don't know about, people maybe haven't seen, because there might not be as well circulated. And because there's this kind of like idea that you don't see Black women in this style of European art, and it's kind of only like exclusively for white women. And so I kind of wanted to push against that idea and really showcase that no, there are actually works out there that do represent these women, but it's harder to find them. And so for me, being able to find this and showcase this was really important, because I feel like it gives them this new life that they don't have. And, you know, you can go through scroll and see them on Instagram, but I feel like having them with these quotes and being able to add that together really gives them like even more life and context, and really kind of humanizes them, because obviously we don't really know much about the women in these paintings. So even if like I could add like the specific quotes or an analysis of that, it gives them like that context within that time period that's really missing. Secondary sources that inspired the work.
Yeah, or like inform your
Okay.
analysis.
Yeah, like I've been working with these texts with Professor Saxon one-on-one. We've been like reading through these last semester, and so I kind of like looked into just like any like theory around them, as well as just any other kind of commentaries on the texts themselves. And I kind of also just wanted to give them like I said, like a new life as well, because like there, especially with these books, there's really great introductions when you get certain editions that have like a lot of background and context into them that I definitely utilized, and kind of just wanting to read it in a new way and just kind of give my own like perspective, having read like different books in this time period and other pieces on this time period. And then your second question was, can you just repeat that?
Oh yeah, of course. Did you edition your book, and can you see like where could you see your book ending up next, or like do you have any new directions for your book?
That's a good question. I'm not entirely sure. You know, I would like for it to go somewhere. I'm not sure how. That could be a conversation we can have. But as of right now, like I said, it's on my website for anyone to see that. But I really do feel like I would like to have like, you know, it be more available, because I feel like it's a really great piece of just like showing, like I said, these artworks and these books. And I think that like, you know, exposing more people to it would be really like incredible.
Were there things that you especially related to in your research? Like, is there one thing that stuck out to you and kind of like resonated with you?
So she was asking if there's anything that stuck out and resonated with my research. And I think that really kind of just like, I feel like going into these books, I had like, I don't want to say I knew what happened, but when you read a lot of books during this time, you begin to notice similar things. And I think like as Professor Saxon said earlier in my introduction, I do really like to write myself. And I feel like these books definitely are missing like that happy ending, and are missing kind of like, you know, obviously like they're kind of responding to their time period, but I feel like just seeing the way in which kind of they feel, how these women feel, and the way that they are constantly having to just show their worth. And like I mentioned earlier, they do have like this wealth and this privilege, but ultimately because of their race, it does, you know, doesn't really help them in the way in which that we would think it would. And I feel like it definitely resonated with a lot of what they said and kind of their sentiment, just like, you know, being like a woman of color myself, and just kind of like the way in which that their experiences are not something that's new, and it's still something that a lot of like women face today. And so I think that, you know, it kind of just shows that this is still something that's relevant even now.
I just want to say, I want to piggyback a little bit here, because to me, I went around and around with the ending of the Woman of Color.
Yes.
Right, because the end of whether or not leaving the white guy and opening a school is a refusal of like erotic and romantic potentiality, or an escape from the marriage plots.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely is a really interesting thing to think about, right? Like what like it's a double-edged sword, and it's really fun to think about.
Right.
We do.
I was wondering what advice you would give to someone who also likes to write like an artistic book or manuscript.
So she was asking what advice would I give to anyone who's interested in doing a book similar to this. And I think that, you know, once you kind of have the idea of what you have in mind, really just like go for it. Like I honestly, like, I didn't know like if I would be able to pull this off, to be honest. Like there was a lot of bumps along the way. I had to rework a lot of different things and had to learn how to use Photoshop. I've never worked with it before. And I basically like created this in the span of like less than a month because I kind of was on like a time limit. But really just like, you know, go out there, like try this, like, you know, create something that you're really like proud of, honestly, because I think that like, try something new and like just being able to put myself out of my comfort zone and do something that I've never done before, I think was really, you know, gratifying. And I think that, it's a really interesting way to just like have this work be shown and like I said, in a new light. And I think that like having a visual aspect of it is really interesting with a book because a lot of the time we're used to just kind of like a text, you know, just very simple. And then maybe like the most visual we'll get is like a book cover. But I think that like the reason why like manuscripts I think were so popular is because of that visual element along with the text. So I think creating that is very interesting, especially now kind of just like utilizing these different styles and paintings and all of that. Yeah.
Sorry, another question.
No worries.
How do you reconcile kind of like the beautiful commentary you provided from these like historical works with kind of knowing like the lens that you're coming from in the era that we live in? Or do you feel like they kind of just it's like a natural dialogue?
So I think that like for myself, I really like with my work, I really emphasize kind of the historical element, but at the same time, I'm realizing that, you know, I'm reading this in like a modern lens and a modern context. And I think that that really, you know, makes me more critical of these things. And like I said, I do really like the beauty of it, but at the same time, I realized that like, you know, even though these images are beautiful and there's like this really decorative aspect to it, just like reading the quotes and the analysis, it's a very, you know, somber scene. And I think that kind of like, it definitely, I feel like in terms of like, it adds to that, you know, and it kind of like utilizes that historic, like I said, like manuscript style that these women were excluded from, but ultimately like it does also, you know, doesn't shy away from kind of the reality of this. And I didn't want this to just be some really pretty, like, you know, positive thing, because I realized that that's not the reality of this. And I wanted to really showcase that, like, you know, we can celebrate, but we can also be, you know, thinking critically of this as well.
Someone who's also read these texts and is also one of color, like when you're reading them, it's very hard because we see ourselves in these situations, like we see ourselves in the character. How did you find solace or find respite? Sorry, word, but how did you take time and space for yourself during this process, which I think in some ways is healing, but it's also very much labor.
Right.
And it is trauma.
Right.
As well.
Did everyone hear that? How did I take time to kind of heal through this process and kind of like, because this is trauma and how do I like cope with that? So I think for me, like my biggest like goal with this was really to just kind of like showcase these works. And I think that for me, like I definitely look for, you know, kind of more modern, I would say positive depictions. And so this also inspired a short story that I wrote. And I ended up writing a short historical fiction story with a Black main character who is like an upper class woman, and I gave her a happy ending. And I think this was really, you know, kind of like I was like I wrote something that I wish I could read. And then like that was definitely a really cathartic thing, because I feel like it can be so easy to kind of wrapped up in this like, you know, really just like traumatic negative things. And I think that like we need to kind of like also have that space to really step away and like be able to, you know, find a way to kind of make this into creating something new. And so for me, that was like something that came out of this. Yeah. Does anyone have any final questions or anything they'd like to share? Yeah.
Did you see any cool pieces of art with Black women in them in person?
Yes, actually I did. I was actually looking through it recently because I did like an Instagram takeover for the WATV Instagram, and so the first photos that I had was actually when I was in Texas visiting Hamida, and we went to the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, and I took pictures of Black women there, and then when I was in Paris this past winter, I also did what I call a Black art tour of Paris, and so I collected different like images and like sculptures and things like that, and then I went through and I like went and saw all of that in person, and so I really like that aspect as well. I didn't use anything that I saw in person, but it was still nice to be able to see that and kind of see what's out there. And just like being able to like just see these pieces in person, I think is like a really special like experience. Thank you. The physical book is up here for anyone who wants to go ahead and flip through it and take a look. Thank you, everyone.